Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, whether it's the morning, afternoon, or evening for you. So we're very happy to welcome you to the fourth and penultimate talk of the Georgetown IDP Lecture Series following the Silk Roads to North America. And this series is generously sponsored by the Henry Luce Foundation. Which we're very grateful for. So I'm Melody Dumi, Curator of Chinese Collections and the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library. And this series is organized to celebrate the upcoming completion of the Georgetown IDP North American Silk Road Collections Project, which is co-supervised by Georgetown University and the IDP at the British Library. The project is managed by Dr. Miki Morita, and it began in 2016 with the view of virtually bringing together Silk Road items that are dispersed in North American institutions by incorporating them into the IDP's public database or website. And so today is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. FOONG Ping, who's Foster Foundation Curator of Chinese Art at the Seattle Art Museum and affiliate associate professor at the University of Washington for her lecture entitled Dunhuang in Seattle. So FOONG Ping received her PhD from Princeton University, and she began her career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art as Jane and Morgan Whitney Fellow, and taught at the University of Chicago as assistant professor and at the University of California, Berkeley. She currently oversees the Seattle Art Museum's extensive collection of Chinese art, from historic to modern and contemporary, and its presentation, research, care, and interpretation. So Dr. FOONG co-curated the reopening of the Seattle Asian Art Museum after an expansion and extensive modernization of its landmark 1933 Art Deco building. Dr. FOONG is a scholar of Tang-dynasty Chinese landscape painting, and her 2015 book, The Efficacious Landscape, on the authorities of painting at the Northern Song Court, won the Joseph Levenson Book Prize. She has ongoing interest in the interplay of picture and poetry, literature, culture, society, and identity, and the institutional and architectural context for art and artists, and collecting and connoisseurship, which will be the topic of our talk today. Her recent research is on the biographies of collected objects, specifically the later lives of Buddhist art in the late Qing dynasty and early Republican era. And so I would like to end by saying that the presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to put in any questions you may have, and we'll be taking them towards the end of the session. And it is now my honor to hand over to Dr. FOONG Ping. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. Let me share my screen. So thank you very much, Melody, for your kind introduction. I'm very grateful to the organizers of this lecture series for this chance to talk about the collections at the Seattle Art Museum related to Dunhuang, which forms a small but quite interesting group of just 8 works. The most recent and exciting acquisition is one rare Tang-dynasty Buddhist sutra manuscript fragment from Dunhuang, on which I will spend most of my time today talking about. Let's just say that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused great upheavals in all our lives, but one unexpected upside, at least for me, was some focused time for research that is fewer days filled with travel, commuting, and meetings. And with a little bit of perseverance, not to mention some really good luck on Google, I was able to resolve questions about the provenance of this manuscript just sitting at my desk. And I'd like to share some findings with you. In fact, just 5 years ago, the Seattle Art Museum had only 2 pieces related to the Silk Road. That is, this talk would have been a really short talk 5 years ago. Now, these 2 mural fragments were acquired by Dr. Richard Fuller the founder of our museum. And they are from the Buddhist cave temples of Kizil, near the ancient city of Kucha in China's Xinjiang province today. They were amongst the many artifacts brought to Germany by explorers Albert Grunewald and Albert von Lecoq from their expeditions from around 1905 to 1914. A group of the smaller fragments was sold in the 1920s to raise funds to publish catalogs of the Central Asian collection in Berlin. In fact, many Kizil examples in US museum and private collections, such as at the Metropolitan Museum, the Freer Gallery, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, were from that sale. These two pieces actually were gifts from A.W. Barr of the Royal Asiatic Society to Richard Fuller in 1930, who then gave them to Seattle Art Museum 3 years later. The Seattle fragments have inscriptions in German on the original frame you see here on the right, and the same inscription is repeated on the plaster backing at left. And my own cursory research proposes their origins in cave 224 of Kizil, but there are many specialists out there who I assume can help me confirm, and I hope a couple of you are listening in. So please do get in touch with your knowledge. This area of the world has always been geographically challenging and politically complex. In the past, it was at the crossroads of the Chinese and Tibetan and the Turkic and Uyghur empires. Now, Dunhuang, which is right here, was an ancient city located at the convergence of the northern and southern caravan routes of the Silk Roads. And it was an oasis, a center of trade, but an outpost, a very long way away from the capital of China in central China, surrounded on all sides by extreme and harsh terrain. The Gobi Desert lay northeast of Dunhuang, and the dreaded Taklamakan Desert lay to its west. On this map, you see the locations of the Kizil caves that I just talked about here near Kucha, and then the Mogao caves near Dunhuang here, both renowned for their extensive Buddhist cave temple complexes. From the 4th to around the 14th century, Dunhuang was the Mecca of art and worship, and there were many religions practiced there, and they were as divergent as its residents and travelers, which included pilgrims, monks, nuns, traders, merchants, and so forth. And there were Taoists, Nestorians, Zoroastrians, Manichaeans, and Muslims. Now, the primary religion that flourished at Dunhuang for 1,000 years was Buddhism. And at the rock cliff named Mogao, translated as the Peerless Caves near Dunhuang, hundreds of caves were excavated over a millennium as temples. And on the left, you see this is a cliffside view. These dark spots here are the cave door openings. A few of the temples were grand halls housing gigantic Buddhas, like this one on the right, so mysteriously hidden behind this facade. Multi-story Buddha sculpture, 116 feet tall and still standing today. There were also caves that were merely small niches where only a single person could squeeze in to practice their faith. And at the site of Mogao alone, there were 500 caves decorated with murals and about 2,400 stucco sculptures. Many of these sacred spaces were originally decorated lavishly, such as with silk banners and altar hangings. The walls were covered with frescoes and inside niches, stucco sculptures showing scenes from Buddha's life. So these lavishly painted mural images of the paradises that awaited believers survive, if in somewhat faded glory. In the heyday of Dunhuang, beginning in the early Tang-dynasty, aristocrats also began to sponsor caves, that is, to excavate the rock cliff, to hire artists, and to financially support the opening of caves. This cave that you see is cave 321, was probably sponsored by the powerful Tang Dynasty Empress Wu, who would rule China as its sovereign, and Wu Zetian was the one and only female emperor. After about 1,000 years of efflorescence, the Mogao caves waned along with the Silk Road trade, and eventually they were forgotten. forgotten, that is, until the early 20th century. And to be precise, on the evening of June 22nd, 1900, the Taoist monk Wang Yuanlu made an important discovery. This is him in a 1907 photograph. Abbot Wang was the unofficial guardian of the Mogao caves, who found ways to solicit donations in order to raise money to maintain the temples and restore statues. On that date, in 1900, while clearing sand from cave 16, his workmen accidentally discovered a hollow wall along a passageway. And removing that wall, they found a hidden door. This door led into a small cave that contained thousands of ancient manuscripts and paintings dating from the 4th to 11th centuries. And it had originally been constructed as a memorial cave for a local monk after he died in the 9th century. And you can see this monk's sculptural portrait here in this color photograph. The memorial cave was later filled from top to bottom, or rather bottom to top, with stacks and bundles of scrolls and paintings, and then finally sealed up in the 11th century for reasons unclear and still actively being debated by scholars. The sensational discovery of Cave 17 founded an entire new field of medieval studies called Dunhuangology in China, then in Japan, Europe, and America, with literally thousands of articles and hundreds of monographs published. And I hope to add my own modest contributions to that list based on my studies of 2 objects in the Seattle Art Museum collection. Indeed, Cave 17's contents are reckoned priceless today. Many artifacts found or excavated in the first decades of the 20th century in China have now acquired status as national treasures. And as one scholar puts it, Dunhuang manuscripts are at the top of that list. But at the time of Abbot Wang's discovery, it meant little to those around him. More often, they regarded the old, yellowed manuscripts as just useless old paper. Nevertheless, Wang didn't give up, offering them to various local government officers as proof of his discovery. And these gifts also served to cultivate personal favor for this former soldier turned Taoist monk and self-declared caretaker of the Mogao cave temples. One of the first persons that Abbot Wang contacted was the circuit intendant of Suzhou, a Manchu official named Yan Dong, who was a scholar. The abbot loaded a crate full and traveled from Mogao to Suzhou, which was about between here and here, a journey of about 400 kilometers from the caves. But even this Yan Dong didn't ascribe any great value to the manuscripts, purportedly saying that his own handwriting was better than on the pieces Abbot Wang showed to him. It was the painter, Xie who had reported this news, based on stories that he heard while he was visiting the Mogao caves between 1942 and 1943. And by this time, the impression of Abbot Wang's motives were less than favorable, portraying him as sly and secretive, someone hoping to make money from his discovery of Cave 17's contents. And in this excerpt, Xie notes clearly that some manuscripts pass from hand to hand. So from that Manchu official, circuit intendant Yan Dong, who I just mentioned, and from Yan Dong to an unnamed Belgian man from the tax office at Jiayuguan, that is very near Suzhou. And then this Belgian man then in turn, oops, sorry, let me see. This person, this Belgian man, in turn offered some pieces to other local officials after traveling westward, passing through Xinjiang province here. I cannot overemphasize the great cultural, art historical, and religious significances of the Mogao caves, not to mention the specific importance of Cave 17, this so-called library cave. Yet Dunhuang was eventually abandoned over the centuries. During the late Qing dynasty in the late 19th century, few willingly went to China's western regions given the harsh living conditions, and some of them were sent there in exile by the Qing dynasty court. And it was really only in the early 20th century when European explorers brought attention back to Dunhuang and the subsequent realization by Chinese scholars in Beijing of its great importance. One of the first foreigners to arrive at Dunhuang in 1907 was Sir Aurel Stein at Left, who led a total of 4 expeditions to Chinese Central Asia. And the photograph of Abbot Wang that I just showed to you was taken when Stein visited Dunhuang in 1907. The only other foreigner predating Stein who certainly heard about Cave 17's discovery, but may or may not have actually visited Mogao, was the Belgian tax officer mentioned in Xie Zhiliu's account, who received those manuscripts from Circuit Intendant Yan Dong. The next foreign visitor immediately after Stein was Paul Pelliot, who arrived in 1908, 1 year after Stein, and he was able to procure even more works from the library cave. Of course, Pelliot had the advantage of being a sinologist and a polyglot, and he was able to read the documents, and he knew a little bit more about what he was getting. Pelliot spent 3 weeks reading in the cave, as you can see in this famous photograph on the right, reading by candlelight. The Stein and Pelliot expedition soon led to the dispersal of Dunhuang collections outside China. After his second expedition, Aurel Stein returned to Europe with a trove of manuscripts, silk scrolls, banner paintings from the library cave, acquired for a very modest sum from Abbot Wang. And this example on your left, a very fine painting of a high-class Tang-dynasty lady, that is her soul floating on a cloud being led to paradise by a bodhisattva, now held at the British Library, the British Museum, sorry. And the Stein manuscripts are held at the British Library. Paul Pelliot's expedition brought back to France statues, frescoes, objects, over 200 paintings and banners, now at the Musée Guimet. These 2 examples on the right are very rare wood-painted Tang-dynasty guardian kings. These works, preserved in Cave 17, hint at the wide variety of materials used for Buddhist worship that no longer exist in caves. These probably included wood sculptures, silks, textiles, banners, priestly vestments, and sutras in many different languages, some of which were multilingual, that once found uses at Mogao and nearby. Eventually, other adventurous visitors began to make their way to this ancient desert outpost. Around the middle of the 20th century was when Chinese scholars and artists also started traveling to Dunhuang to better understand these splendid cave temples. Artist Zhang Daqian, who arrived in 1941, even attempted to do repairs and to make replicas of Mogao cave murals. Here he is on the right. He's working on a painting on a stretcher. On the left is a copy of one mural from the Yulin cave temples. You remember 1941, the world was in the midst of World War II by this time. Zhang Daqian, who stayed at Dunhuang for nearly 3 years, invited Xie Zhiliu to join him in 1942. And like Zhang, Xie Zhiliu made copies of the cave murals during his time there. Here's one example here on the right. And Xie Zhiliu also wrote down stories about Cave 17, and these were oral histories, you can call them, eventually publishing those valuable records, including that excerpt that I just read to you. Soon to follow, the couple, James Lowe and his wife Lucy, arrived in 1943, and a journey requiring first military transport, followed by horse and donkey-drawn cart. They had just been married, so this was quite the arduous desert city honeymoon. Now, James was a photojournalist for the Central News Agency, and he had taken a year's leave to photograph Dunhuang. Lucy was also a photographer, and she remains hale and hearty today. If it were not for COVID, I would not have missed her 101st birthday celebration earlier this year. Upon arriving at Mogao, the Lowes proceeded to systematically photograph the exteriors and interiors of the caves under very difficult conditions without electricity or running water. Together, they produced over 2,500 black and white images that record the caves as they were in the mid-20th century. Many of these views no longer exist today, so they are an incredibly valuable resource for all art historians like myself. In 2016, I organized an exhibition at the Seattle Asian Art Museum with Princeton Art Museum about James and Lucy Lowe's meticulous documentation of what the caves looked like before the Cultural Revolution. But the show was about the technical virtuosity, the aesthetic sensibilities of their photographs. Through their eyes, we learn how to look at the Dunhuang caves. We displayed the sutra and paper fragments that they collected, some of which, Lucy tells me, they literally picked up off the desert floor when they were visiting those years. The show also included the Lowe's own artistic renditions and full-scale painted reproductions of the cave murals. After moving to Taiwan in the 1950s, the Lowe's became part of a community of artists and intellectuals, and they invited a group of young artists to produce life-size copies of the Dunhuang murals, based on the Lowe's black and white slides, Lucy's comprehensive notes on color and location, and their memories of the caves. These facsimiles are quite unique in the fidelity to the originals. They are collaborative and they are imaginative renderings that also impart a sense of the Lowe's mission to preserve history as accurately as possible. Some were displayed at the 1964-65 World Fair at Flushing Meadows in Queens, New York at the China Pavilion. Now, after the exhibition at the Seattle Asian Art Museum ended, Lucy Lowe generously offered to donate 4 Mogao facsimiles from her own collection to the museum, and these are 2 of them. I myself find it of great interest to parse all these so-called reproductions of facsimiles, each of which has its own visuality, produced with different motivations, and hold various positions in our historical discourse. All told, I dare say, a good idea for a future exhibition. There was one other event of equally long-lasting significance that occurred as a result of the Seattle Asian Art Museum's Journey to Dunhuang exhibition. During the run of the show, I had given a talk to members of my museum, and it so happened that one person in the audience mentioned my talk to his father. And this father then wrote me a letter saying, I have a page of scripture that may be from the Mogao caves at Dunhuang. This distinguished gentleman and I then corresponded for over a year about his manuscript, and he generously offered it to the museum as a gift. In one letter to me, he charmingly made a plea for the museum to take over care of the scroll, saying that, quote, the manuscript probably left China around 1938 and has been in Hawaii in a trunk with mothballs and at ambient temperatures and humidity ever since, unquote. During that year of correspondence, we furiously researched the manuscript in all its dimensions. I worked on the art historical aspects, and my colleague, Geneva Griswold, our associate conservator at the Seattle Art Museum, helped me on the science. We had to tread very carefully, indeed, knowing of the many possible difficulties that lay ahead to determine if it was possible to acquire this work for the museum, given what we know are all the major issues. First, the known issue of forgeries of Dunhuang manuscripts. And second, no less tricky, the provenance or history of ownership, how the piece left China and under what circumstances. Geneva helped me to take a sample from this area, a tiny piece already hanging on literally by a thread, and sent it to a laboratory for fiber analysis. The lab determined that nearly all of the fibers are of the Moracea and Almacea family, which includes mulberry, and happily consistent with reports conducted on some British Library Dunhuang manuscripts. While Geneva was organizing the lab tests, I also got to work from the art historian's point of view. The first thing I evaluated was the sutra's artistic merit, and I find it to be an excellent work of art. I date the writing to the Tang-dynasty, around the 8th century, since it is similar to the imperial form of calligraphy that was standardized by the mid-7th century, based on this famous calligrapher's handwriting on the left, so very elegant. Now, sutra copying is done to gain Buddhist merit, but the handwriting isn't always beautiful. The transcriber of our manuscript on the right was very accomplished in calligraphy. Each character has sophisticated composition and balance. You see, for example, his flicking brush tips here, for example. This is made with tiny finger and wrist movements. You see the varying shapes of each stroke, say from thick to thin to thick, to add visual interest. You see also that his corner turns, for example, are executed with some drama and flair, yet with firmness, with precision. In the later third of the text, which has double the number of characters to fit, the writer maintains command and control. Overall, it is masterful calligraphy, in spite of some unusual orthography here and there, even one or two typos that I identified. The text itself is a somewhat obscure sutra, originally completed before the middle of the 6th century, and it was thought to be apocryphal until the discovery of the library cave. Indeed, the obscurity of the sutra is a good sign for its authenticity, since a forger would much more likely copy a more popular sutra, like the Lotus Sutra or the Diamond Sutra. Maybe they would add a date to add extra value to their forgery. And the name of the sutra is very long, roughly translated as the Sutra on the Solemn Attainment of Buddhahood by means of repentance to extinguish sins in a great, thorough, and broad way. This fragment only preserves a small section of a longer text in 3 chapters. It is a manual for calling out to Buddha for salvation, something like a recipe book, providing combinations of Buddha's many names. It contains instructions for the confession rites, that it's a repentance ritual that one must conduct over 7 days without sleep, 6 times per 24 hours, reciting the entire sutra 3 times a day. The fragment is very rare indeed. Only 3 other early fragments of the sutra, certainly from Dunhuang, survive. In the mid-20th century, scholars reconstructed the sutra on the basis of these 3 Dunhuang fragments, 2 of which are in Japanese collections with chapters 1 and 2. The 3rd fragment came from Orlstein's 2nd expedition, now in the British Library, preserving chapter 3. This makes the Seattle Art Museum piece the 4th extant Dunhuang fragment, and it preserves a small section of chapter 2. The British Library Orlstein manuscript of chapter 3 is much longer and was possibly copied a little earlier. And I want to thank the IDP for providing such wonderfully detailed images on the website, without which I could not have done this research. Now, from this detail of the British Library Sutra at left, we see how the character compositions are actually slightly squatter in shape, so it's rectangular. And the brushwork a little bit plumper, showing less attenuation, the sort of flicking tips, brush complexity that was established by mid-7th century, as seen on the Seattle fragment at right. But there are some similarities too, such as the scalloped top and bottom edges due to water damage while rolled up. And this dark color, this dark yellow of the paper, which is from a dye that functioned as insect repellent, and you often see it used for Buddhist sutras. Art historians have many different ways to get at the question of authenticity and dating, but it happens that our manuscript was accompanied by a very curious document, a gift letter written in English. The note is addressed to Professor Anne Billy, or Billy, from one Rao Yu Ai on May 15th, 1932, and it provides us with excellent clues for retracing the scroll's history. Now, Rao says that the scroll came from a stone room at Dunhuang in Gansu province, that is the library cave that I just discussed. But let us begin with the professor mentioned. In my research, I was able to tease out quite a bit about the characters in this fascinating story. Professor Billy received her BA and MA from Stanford and was the first dean of Fullerton College, Junior College in California. She then took up the offer of a good friend, Fuk Tan Chim, to move to China to teach English at Tsinghua University in Beijing. She had been Fuk Tan's English teacher when he was in high school in Honolulu, and clearly made a strong impression since the two remained friends in the following decades. Professor Billy stayed in China for 11 years, from around 1923 to 34, teaching freshman English and supervising upper-level thesis. She printed a collection of her poems, Broken Tiles, in 1931 in Beijing. So Billy's student, this Rao Yu-ai, gave her a Dunhuang scroll as a gift the very next year in 1932 after the publication of Broken Tiles. Tsinghua was a progressive and vibrant university campus that cultivated foreign cultural exchange. And by 1929, it had sent over 1,200 students to study in the United States. At the time, there were nearly 20 foreign professors from the United States, Britain, Germany, Switzerland, Russia, including Ms. Billy, teaching foreign languages, history, mechanical engineering, political science, and Western music and literature, and so forth. Billy's tenure overlapped with famous Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore, Chinese art historian Gustav Ecker, and also many French and American physicists, chemists, and mathematicians. After the Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, Billy moved to Hawaii to retire, and after an illness, she passed away in Honolulu in 1942. Upon her death, Professor Billy bequeathed the Dunhuang scroll to Fuk-tan Ching, who had invited her to China in the first place and who had by this time served as chair of the Department of Foreign Languages and Literature at Tsinghua University 3 times. As a young man, Fuk-tan had received the Masters of Education from Harvard, and when I spoke to Fuk-tan's son, Dr. Yi Chuan-ching, this is the distinguished gentleman I mentioned earlier, he recounted that his father, quote, like many idealistic second-generation American Chinese from Hawaii of his time, went off to help build the new republic, unquote. Fuk-tan joined the faculty at Tsinghua U in 1923 at age 26 and remained for 25 years through thick and thin, through the university, moving from one city to another, and staying the course through bombing and privation. From his son's recounting, food allowances were so meager that the teachers were sometimes reduced to eating rats. When the pilots of the American volunteer group, the AVG, the Flying Tigers, arrived, he was their liaison. And later, when the US entered World War II, he trained interpreters for General Stilwell's officers commanding Chinese troops in Burma. And it was not until the communists swept to victory in 1948 that Fuk-tan and his family returned home to Hawaii. This is about 6 years after Miss Billy passed away. Fuk-tan's textbook for freshmen cultivated a generation of intellectual elites in liberal arts, including 2 Nobel Prize winners. And this book is still being used, I found out. An updated English-Chinese bilingual edition was recently published in 2017. The stories of Professors A. M. Billy and Fuk-tan Ching against the sweeping background of wartime experiences are so very fascinating. But for today, I want to head us toward a different direction, namely to investigate the identity of this Rao Yu-ai. The signature on the gift letter is in English, so this leaves us with a great difficulty, since it provides no information about the Chinese characters or the pronunciation of the name, nor information about the person's gender. As you may know, Chinese is a tonal language. For example, the word I is pronounced in one tone can refer to several different characters, each with different meanings. And there are several tones in Mandarin, so I. Furthermore, I cannot confirm which Chinese dialect is expressed using this transliteration. So based on the spelling of Dunhuang, I suspected that the person was using Cantonese rather than Mandarin. And if it were Cantonese, then we are possibly talking about 9 different reading tones. Furthermore, I'm not sure how to read the cursive of the surname. Is it R-A-O or J-A-O? This is no doubt quite the pickle. But the letter does offer several facts. That is, this gift was made by Rao to Professor Billy on May 15th, 1932. And given Rao's proficiency in English, I think they were likely Billy's student at Tsinghua University. Now, between Zoom meetings one day, September of last year, I decided to sit down, to bite the bullet, and to really try and solve this problem. Actually, what happened is that I sat down with Google and Baidu and all the Chinese search engines for 3 days straight, 8 hours each day. Something like what the sutra prescribed, offering up a little suffering of my own for this purpose. My first move was an educated guess. I happen to know a famous scholar, Rao Zhengyi, whose name is romanized in just these two ways, as JAO and as RAO. So let's assume his Rao is our surname. The problem is that this still leaves me with too many possible permutations. Yi has 231 commonly typed characters, not including the emoji of the fish and a cloud, which are pronounced yu and yu. I has 75 commonly typed characters, which makes 17,325 possible combinations, provided that I guessed the surname correctly. Clearly, I needed a better strategy to narrow it down. So logically, while there are 231 U's, not all are equally common as names. I went to work inputting combinations of Chinese characters based on this Rao that we have and different U's. Soon I discovered this person, Rao Yitai, who was a famous physicist, which led me to several other early 20th century names appearing regularly with that Rao and that Yu. And one name that caught my eye was one of 3 daughters of a prominent medical doctor, and it caught my eye because she was a translator with international experience. In fact, all 3 of Dr. Rao's daughters use the same Yu as their middle character. With that in hand, I started randomly inputting between a different I from my list of 76 possible I's. Plus, I added Tsinghua University and foreign language department to my search terms. And it was a piece of luck that I happened to use the word I, meaning love, and bingo. Amazingly, my search using the word love kicked up just 1 and only 1 result. It pointed to this book listing all the professors and students who attended Tsinghua University between 1927 and 1949. Rao Yui was listed as a female graduate of 1933 from the Foreign Languages Department. Her entry in this book on the right lists some of her accomplishments. It was this medical doctor's daughter after all. After receiving her degree in 1933, Ms. Rao Yui went to work as assistant professor of history at Peking University. And then in 1940s onwards, she served as an interpreter at various high-level cultural and education meetings and at international conferences. She translated at the Embassy of Greece and twice in Berlin for the International Women's Federation. She then died in Beijing in 1981. Therefore, we can ascertain with confidence that Ms. Rao Yui was 20 years old when she made Professor Billy a gift of our Dunhuang scroll while attending Tsinghua University in Beijing. Billy in turn bequeathed it to Fuk Tan-ching, her dear friend and chair of her department at Tsinghua University after she passed away in Honolulu, who, after his death in 1956, passed it to his son, who donated it to the Seattle Art Museum in 2017. Being able to identify Rao Yui, needless to say, was very gratifying indeed. But then we might ask, from whom did Ms. Rao herself obtain this scroll? Obviously, the next step was to do a bit more research on her family background. Her father, Rao Fenghuang, was a medical doctor, and I discovered that he was also a devout lay Buddhist. He co-sponsored a Buddhist research organization that promoted teaching, research, translation, and engraving of Buddhist scriptures. But that still didn't satisfy me. So I followed the trail of breadcrumbs further backwards in time, which brought me to Miss Rao's grandfather, Rao Yingqi, who turns out was an important person serving in the Tang-dynasty government as provincial governor of Xinjiang province. Xinjiang is the westernmost part of remote Western China, remote to Beijing, but geographically close to Dunhuang. China's borders were changing in the 19th century. Here's a map of the Qing Empire circa 1820 or so. The provinces are in yellow, and the military governorates and protectorates are in green. The Qing dynasty conquered the region to its west in 1884 and converted it into a new province as part of China proper, naming it Xinjiang, or literally New Frontier. Rao Yingqi, Miss Rao Yuai's grandfather, served as Xinjiang's third governor. He actually held a joint appointment as also governor of the neighboring Gansu province here. And so Dunhuang, which is right about here, was also under his jurisdiction. As provincial governor of both provinces, Rao's seats were therefore at both the capital of Xinjiang province at Urumqi and at the capital of Gansu province at Lanzhou. Furthermore, he held his post exactly during the time of Abbot Wang's discovery of the library cave on June 22nd, 1900. Now, Rao Yingqi is a very important figure in the economic history of the region. He had several positive dealings with foreign explorers, including Aurel Stein. In fact, Stein's activities were Rao's responsibility. In any case, it is clear that our scroll came into Governor Rao's possession soon after the library cave's discovery in 1900. This is because the governor was assigned to his next post in 1902. He packed up his entire household by the end of 1902 and travels over here. He reaches Hami here by January of 1903, where the governor dies while traveling to his next post. At this point, his wife brings the whole family from Hami to their hometown in Hubei to bury the governor there. This included Rao Fenghuang, Governor Rao's son, who was already a young man at age 24. Rao Fenghuang must therefore have known firsthand about the discovery of Cave 17 and the origins of that scroll that eventually came into his own possession. Dr. Rao Fenghuang then imparted this knowledge to his daughter, Rao Yuai, decades later. In 1932, Dr. Rao was in his 50s, and he must have given the scroll to his daughter to honor her esteemed Tsinghua University English professor. The gift Ms. Rao Yuai offered to Professor Billy, therefore, included not only the scroll fragments, but also her family's first-hand knowledge of its origins. She was sure to note this detail in her English letter to Professor Billy, offering that it came from a stone room at Dunhuang. That description was no mere flourish of expression. It was, in fact, a statement in fact. The next chapter in my research about the Dunhuang scroll returns to find out how Governor Rao Yingqi himself got his library cave scroll, and that is another long tale. And so sadly, I must save the details for another time. This next part, if I may say so, is quite the page turner, involving Belgian missionaries prospecting for gold and oil in Western China, guided by a red-bearded Belgian man, Paul Splingaert, a colorful character who was a high-ranking foreigner serving as a mandarin under the Qing dynasty government, and their hair-raising escape on a team of 20 camels across the Gobi Desert on the eve of the Boxer Rebellion in the year 1900. I can prove that Paul was in fact the Belgian man that Xie Zhilu mentioned in his account, the one and only foreigner who gained access to library cave scrolls prior to Aurel Stein, via the Manchu Circuit Intendant Yan Dong, who I described to you at the very beginning of this talk. I'd like to imagine that the Seattle Art Museum manuscript was one of the original troves that left the library cave, passing from Abbot Wang to Yan Dong to Paul, and then to Governor Rao Yingqi. In any case, we can now follow this manuscript's footsteps for over 120 years, from 1900 to 2021. Except for the top edge of the water damage, the scroll mostly survived intact. It evaded the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 and the Sino-Japanese War of 1937. It survived the Hawaiian humidity since 1938 for nearly 80 years. And the yellow dye insect repellent, it clearly repelled both Dunhuang bugs and tropical Hawaiian bugs alike. It traversed many epistemological realms, from its creation as a religious text to its reconceptualization as a worthy gift and now to becoming part of a museum collection. It traversed geographic realms, migrating from Dunhuang to Hubei to Beijing, and eventually traveling from Honolulu to Seattle, where it reappeared to the public for the grand reopening of the Seattle Asian Art Museum in February of 2021 after our renovation, as the crowning jewel of the museum's small, but I dare say, mighty Dunhuang collection. Thank you for listening, and I'm eager and available to take any comments and questions that you might have. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I think for now the audience seems to be very quiet, but I'll give everyone a bit of time to think about questions. In any case, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and amazing, amazing detective work. I think we've got some very nice comments for you in the chat. So complimenting you on the talk.
Oh, hello. There are people who I know out there. Hi, Martin. Nice to hear from you in the chat.
Yes.
I went a little long today, so I hope it's okay. I realize it's the evening for you, all of you, your audience.
For people in the UK, yes, it is probably the most convenient time. I think for people in the US, it might be early on the West Coast and lunchtime on the East.
Yes, it's a late morning for us here.
But I think everyone is joining me in saying how amazing your research is. I guess now that maybe the restrictions are being lifted, slightly lifted, I guess, are you thinking of pushing your research in Europe, or do you think there are sources that might be helpful for you?
Well, Melody, one day I hope to come and see the British Library scroll in person, where the IDP digital images are really wonderful to have for work to conduct this initial research. I think it would be very productive. The next time I'm in London, I will be sure to look you up. I'm not sure what sort of access you are able to provide scholars coming through.
Well, our reading rooms are open, so yes.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I thought I would ask you that after this talk, whether if I can come when I come through next, whether I can come and see the scroll.
Yes,
also, if you have any other scrolls you think that I should pay attention to, that would be very interesting to me.
Yes, well, I think you know how to find us now, so we're definitely can take that over. I think someone, Kathy, okay, I asked a question. So she asked, can you describe how the man from Belgium obtained this?
Yeah. So at the very beginning, hello, I showed this excerpt from the artist Xie Zhiliu at the beginning of my talk, and where he was talking about how the scrolls from the library cave passed from one hand to another hand. So coming from this Manchu official in the city of Suzhou, not too far from the Mogao caves. So he was one of the first to obtain a pretty large group of scrolls. And this is because the abbot Wang had brought it in a cart over to Yandong. And Yandong happened in this early account, this mid-20th century artist account, supposedly passed along some to a Belgian man. So, and who was a tax collector nearby Suzhou. And Yandong and this Belgian man had probably known each other quite well, I would imagine. So I got to work to try and figure out who this Belgian man was. And I found an article in Chinese talking about him. So a Chinese scholar had actually once identified who this Belgian man in Xie Zhiliu's account is. And it was this person named Paul Splengelt. So Paul Splengelt is a very interesting person. He taught himself Chinese. He was part of some of the first people, part of the Belgian missionaries to arrive in Mongolia. And he went to China as a translator for Richthofen, the geographer. So he, the research sort of stopped, the Chinese language research stopped there as to identity of this Belgian man. And so I followed up a little bit. I started working on the missionary archives, reading some letters. Again, I don't read Dutch. I don't have any Dutch whatsoever. So again, these online search engines really saved me, and I was able to have some of those letters translated in the search engines. So I was able to really figure out who this Belgian man was. I even got in touch with the Belgian man's great-granddaughter. She actually lives on the west coast of the US. So there's all these little breadcrumbs that led me to understand some things about how, in general, the early dispersal of scrolls from the library cave, but more particularly how this first group went from Yendong to Paul Spangelt. And then I think that Paul Spangelt, on his way rushing out of China during the Boxer Rebellion, might have given some at that time to Governor Rao Yingqi. And one of them was the scrolls that I just showed to you now in the collection of Seattle Art Museum. At least that is where my research has brought me to at this point. It is a little bit of a guess, this connection between Governor Rao and Paul Spangelt. But I'm hopeful that I can find something out about this relationship, whether they knew each other. Paul Spangelt is actually mentioned in Orelstein's writings. So I'm not sure that is all that well known, but I did find his name there, I think once or so, because it so happened that Orelstein stayed in Paul Spangelt's old tax office housing, passing through the Dunhuang area. So there are these small little pieces of information, which this project has been so wonderful that it just caught my imagination to weave together all these small pieces of information into a broad and long narrative. So I hope it was as interesting to hear about for you as it was for me to make these discoveries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as part of maybe your next phase of research, you can tell us if that Belgian man, Paul Spangelt, got more manuscripts, and if any of them are still, I don't know, located in Belgium, or ended up in Chinese collections. So yeah, very exciting. Thank you very much. I think we don't seem to have any questions, but if anyone wants to follow up, I guess they can email us. It's our address is idp@bl.uk, or possibly follow up with Dr. Fong, and I think we'll be happy to follow up.
So please do get in touch if you are ever any of our audience members and visiting Seattle. Take a look at this aerial photograph of Seattle on the right. It's a wonderful place, very, very temperate in its weather in the summertime. And you can see this picture. This is a picture of the volunteer park, which is where my museum, Seattle Asian Art Museum, is located. And the park itself is an Olmsted Brothers park. So it's a lovely setting for the Asian Art Museum. Mr. Wang says that the IDP is not accessible.
So I've just responded. It's having a bad day, but our technicians are working to fix it. I think we're aware that it's down. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It should be, it should. So we're hopefully that will be resolved. I think it's been down since this morning UK time, but yeah, working on it. Thank you. All right, and I think we can. I hope that our audience will join me in thanking Dr. FOONG Ping for this wonderful talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I mean, if you're also free next Wednesday at the same time, we'll have the last talk of the series, which will be given by Dr. Fan Jeremy Tang on exploring Eastern Silk Roads in the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. And you can also register online to join us. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Melody, for this opportunity.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.